Cameron stood up. Just like that. Mid-lesson. No warning, no raised hand, not even a glance at the clock. He just stood up in the middle of Ms. Granger's history class and said, quiet but sure, "This isn't where I belong." His voice didn't shake. It didn't plead. It knew. And if you were there, if you were sitting in that cold middle school with the flickering lights and the faint smell of wet grass still clinging to backpacks, you would have felt it too, like a pressure in your chest, like the room itself pulled in a breath and forgot how to let it go. Cameron's skin was the color of rich soil, sun-warmed and strong, and his clothes still smelled like morning hay. His knuckles bore the stubborn calluses of a boy who worked before sunrise and didn't speak, unless the silence begged him to. He was a farm kid, the kind of boy teachers passed over during roll call just to avoid the shame of misjudging his worth. But that day, something ancient pressed through his bones, something watching, something waiting. Ms. Granger didn't ask where he was going. She just pointed to the door and told him to leave. Everyone saw her hand tremble. Listen closely. This isn't some schoolyard drama about discipline and defiance. This is your file now. This is the story no one prints, the record that doesn't show up in any district archives, the kind of truth you only hear when the house is dead quiet, and you start to remember things you never lived. Because the next morning, before the sun finished rising, before the janitor had even unlocked the side entrance, a helicopter descended over the soybean fields behind the school. You could hear it before you saw it. That sound. It wasn't military, not news, not medical. It was private, old money, southern steel spinning through cold Midwestern air. It hovered above the dew, blades churning up the mist like ghosts escaping the soil, and then it landed without apology, flattening everything around it. The door didn't open right away, but when it did, the man who stepped out was not someone the town should have forgotten. See, people pretend not to remember old things when it keeps their hands clean, but the moment Cameron's grandfather stepped onto that field, with boots older than the town's last mayor and a silver chain glinting, against a shirt hand-woven in Liberia, it wasn't just a visit, it was a reckoning. And that's when something broke. Right there, right then. Madison Taylor, the school secretary who'd worked that front desk for 19 years, dropped her coffee mug as if it burned her palms. She whispered something no one else heard. Something that made her eyes roll white and her knees hit the floor, and vanished before the sound of ceramic ever reached the tile. Her purse was still under the desk. Her chair still spun slowly, like she'd just stepped away for a second. You're not imagining this. You didn't click on the wrong video. You're here for a reason, and you're already too deep to turn back. Because buried in this story is a name Cameron never spoke, a war his grandfather never lost, and a secret this town paved over with parking lots and prayer circles. This isn't about race, not really. This is about memory, about the people we send away before they show us what we're really afraid of. If you're still watching, if your breath just caught without you knowing why, it's because you felt it too. When the helicopter lifted off, no one noticed that the school's flagpole cast a shadow pointing north, even though it was still morning. And no one is asked why every clock in that building still reads 8:03 a.m., the exact moment Cameron whispered to himself, "She's coming back." But who is she? And why does every mirror in that school now reflect a hallway no one remembers building? Keep watching. The hallway in the mirror stretched longer than it should have, endless, twisting, like the inside of a dream you can't wake from. But when Cameron blinked, the reflection snapped back to the cracked tile floor and peeling paint of a room he recognized all too well. It was there, but it wasn't there, like a ghost caught behind glass. And that moment, when reality cracked and hesitated, was the first time he felt the edges of his own mind blur, as if what he'd seen wasn't just something outside of him, but a fissure inside himself that had been waiting to open. The truth behind what no one tells you is that sometimes the past doesn't just haunt a place, it burrows into the people who live there, and it isn't always clear if it's a memory or a hallucination, if what you're seeing is real or a symptom of something deeper, darker, and far more unspeakable. The morning after Madison vanished, everything felt wrong, not loud or violent, No, that would have been easier. But small, sharp little fractures in the quiet. The school's intercom crackled with static between announcements, voices whispering fragments of names that dissolved before you could catch them fully. Cameron kept finding his phone unlocked on the kitchen table, showing videos he never took. Brief, blurred images of empty hallways, distorted faces, and a faint lullaby he didn't recognize, but that echoed in his chest like a forgotten wound. Sometimes when he replayed them, the files would glitch, rewind by themselves, or vanish entirely, as if the footage was alive, resisting capture. That lullaby, some nights he swore it was calling him. But calling from where, he couldn't. And then there was Nathan, the first person who'd come to him after the helicopter landed, a face from the edge of his memory. Nathan spoke like a friend, but his words twisted on the air like smoke. You're chasing ghosts, Cam. Or maybe they're chasing you. His eyes never quite met Cameron's when he said that, flickering somewhere between worry and something darker. Nathan had stories. Stories of the school, the town, and people who disappeared before their names could be spoken. But his tales didn't line up. One moment, he'd swear Madison left town weeks ago. The next, he'd claim she never worked there at all. He showed Cameron old cassette tapes he said were recordings from the school archives, but the voices on them were garbled, the words half memories, half lies, layered and static like secrets they didn't want anyone to hear. Cameron wanted to believe Nathan, because it was easier than confronting the growing emptiness inside himself, the gaps where memories should be but weren't. Some nights he woke, up drenched in sweat, the whisper from Madison's disappearance twisting into a name no one else remembered saying, Evelyn. But who was Evelyn? A ghost? A warning? Or the truth buried under decades of silence? There's a real unsolved mystery here. Not just about a boy expelled or a grandfather's helicopter, but about what happens when a town refuses to remember its own shadows. When the past crawls into your dreams and the present slips through your fingers like smoke. What they don't want you to remember is that some things aren't meant to be uncovered, not because they don't exist, but because the mind can only hold so much before it breaks. And as Cameron sits alone, listening to the faint hum of that ghostly lullaby, the question isn't whether the school's halls hide a secret, but whether he himself is still tethered to the reality everyone else claims. And Nathan? You can never quite tell if he's a guide or a ghost, a friend or the whisper that's driving Cameron deeper into the dark. Because when the truth hides in silence, the only certainty is that nothing is certain anymore. Cameron sat cross-legged. On the floor of the old library, a dusty ledger cracked open in front of him, the yellowed pages smelling faintly of mothballs and forgotten promises. The room was empty except for the soft hum of the overhead fluorescent light, flickering rhythmically like a heartbeat barely holding on. For the first time since Madison vanished, something clicked, a buried thread pulling taut through years of silence and half-glimpsed truths. The ledger wasn't just a list of attendance or inventory. It was a chronicle of disappearances, names crossed out with a hurried hand, dates that aligned unsettlingly with rumors whispered in town, but never spoken aloud. Cameron's breath hitched when he saw the date next to one name. Evelyn Harper, listed as missing just like the voice in his nightmares, and there, scrawled in the margin beneath it, a barely legible note, the boy who saw. His fingers trembled as he traced the faded ink, the words sinking in like cold water. For the first time, the mystery seemed to unravel before him, not a hallucination, not a glitch in memory, but a hidden truth clawing its way to the surface. This was it. This was the story no one wanted uncovered, but the relief was short-lived, because as Cameron flipped back through the pages, something shifted, a flicker of unease crawling under his skin like a shadow he couldn't shake. He came across a faded photograph tucked between the ledger's pages, worn and cracked, showing a group of children standing in front of the very school he had walked out of just days ago. Their faces were blurry, but one stood out, a boy with the same stubborn jaw, the same quiet defiance in his eyes as Cameron himself. And behind the children, nearly hidden in the background, a figure watched unblinking, an outline so faint it might have been a trick of light, except the figure's gaze felt sharp, patient, and merciless. His heart hammered as he realized this was no coincidence, no relic of a forgotten past. It was a mirror reflecting something darker, something that had been watching all along, waiting for the right moment to move again. Then the memory hit him, unbidden and raw, something he'd buried deep like a splinter beneath skin. A late summer night, a backyard barbecue with his family, the distant sound of a siren piercing the air, and a sudden hush falling over the crowd. His grandfather's voice, low and tight, saying something to his father that Cameron hadn't understood at the time, but now echoed like a warning. It's never safe to forget. The moment stretched out, like the slow drip of water in an empty house. And for a second, Cameron swore he saw the same unblinking eyes from the photograph watching from the shadows of the porch. That night felt like a memory glitch, a fragment of a trauma folded into his bones, something that connected the past to the present in a way no one had dared speak aloud. The mystery wasn't just about a boy expelled or a missing secretary. It was a pattern, a cycle repeating in ways too subtle to notice until the cracks became too wide to ignore. The danger wasn't out there, lurking in the halls or the helicopters. Or it was inside the story itself, in the silence between memories, in the weight of knowing that some truths are buried not because they're forgotten, but because they're too dangerous to face. Cameron's hands shook as he closed the ledger, the room tilting like the world was off-kilter. He thought he had found the key, the hidden door to everything. But then, beneath the ledger, tucked beneath the last page, he found it. A single grainy photograph, a faded Polaroid of himself, standing in that same hallway, under the same flickering light. But in the picture, his eyes were closed, his face twisted in a scream he didn't remember ever making. And just like that, everything shifted. The story he thought he knew was a lie. You're not crazy. They lied to you. And now, as the truth folds in on itself, you'll need to watch everything again, because nothing here is what it seems. There is something that stretches beyond Cameron's fractured memories, something that isn't confined to the dim hallways of a forgotten school, or the whispered names scrawled in a dusty ledger. Because Cameron isn't alone. In the shadows beyond the frame of his unraveling reality, there are others, faces flickering in the periphery, watching, waiting, communicating in ways that no one outside the fractured circle can understand. You weren't wrong to feel it, the creeping sense that this story is bigger than one boy, one missing secretary, one grandfather's helicopter cutting through the sky at dawn. The truth is this. There is a silent audience, connected by threads, unseen, each person haunted by fragments of the same secret nightmare. They are the ones who find cryptic messages hidden in old photographs, the kind of coded symbols slipped into margins, or faint scratches on classroom desks, markings that pulse with meaning only when the right eyes look long enough to decode. Them, shared dreams bind them, strange, vivid visions where names and faces collide in unsettling mosaics, where whispered voices echo in the darkness, repeating lines nobody else remembers hearing, but that feel like warnings sewn directly into their minds. This isn't coincidence. It's communication, a secret language folded inside the fabric of their waking hours and sleep alike. And now, as you watch this story unfold, you're being drawn into that web, whether you know it or not, whether you want to or not. The shadows around Cameron begin to feel less like isolation and more like a gathering storm. Somewhere, on the edges of every camera angle and every blurred recording, there are eyes watching, not just the ones we can see, but ones beneath the surface, layered and hidden, cold and patient. They watch the slow collapse of memory, the way the past refuses to stay buried. Found footage from 20 years ago, grainy, disjointed, haunting, surfaces in unexpected places. A burned-out hard drive discovered by a stranger in a pawn shop. An unmarked USB left in the pocket of a coat Cameron doesn't remember wearing. Whispers of tapes labeled, "What the government never released." These fragments aren't random. They are pieces of a puzzle designed to be almost impossible to solve. A deliberate maze meant to ensnare anyone who dares chase the truth. The more Cameron, and now you, reach toward understanding, the more the edges of reality dissolve into something far more unstable and terrifying. The familiar starts to twist, and the line between who Cameron is and who he thinks he is begins to blur until it no longer holds meaning. And then, there is the third voice, a perspective lurking beneath. The noise, a thread of truth that feels unbearably close and yet impossible to grasp fully. This observer does not claim innocence or clarity. Instead, they speak from the cracks between realities, a whisper in the static, a flicker in the corner of your eye that no one else sees. They hint at control, at a force that does not just watch but shapes the unfolding story like a puppeteer, pulling strings from behind the curtain. You were right all along, this voice murmurs through glitches in audio recordings, in the margins of letters sent anonymously to Cameron's email, messages that pulse with an urgency that claws at the edges of sanity. This isn't merely about lost memories or a boy expelled from school. It's about the very nature of identity, about how much of who we are is truly ours, and how much is scripted, erased, or rewritten by invisible hands. The observer's words unsettle because they promise no answers, only more questions, about the control we think we hold, about the memories we cherish, about the forces that watch from the dark corners of our lives, always waiting to intervene. As the threads of Cameron's story entangle with these others, you begin to see the pattern, the inexplicable disappearances, the shared nightmares, the cryptic symbols, all pointing toward a force both ancient and modern, familiar and alien, terrifying in its patience and in its reach. This force is not named, not defined, but its presence is felt deep in the bones, in the space where memory warps and reality fractures. It feeds on silence and confusion, thrives in the spaces where truths are denied or forgotten. The air grows, heavier with every revelation, every shadow that stretches longer than it should, every voice that whispers warnings just beneath hearing. You feel it too, don't you? The pull of something watching from beyond, the chill that settles over every truth you thought you knew. You were right all along to question, to doubt, to look closer. But now, as you sit with the pieces in your hands, you realize that this is only the beginning. The story folds back on itself, a loop of secrets and lies that demands you watch. Again, listen harder and wonder. If the truth is so carefully hidden, what does that say about the reality we all live in? The answers are out there, tangled in shadows, waiting for the brave or the desperate enough to chase them down. But beware. The deeper you go, the less certain you become of anything, including yourself. There comes a moment when the weight of everything you've uncovered is no longer about facts or events, but about the raw core of what it means to be human, fragile, broken, and fiercely searching for meaning in chaos. Cameron stands on the edge of that precipice now, the line between destruction and salvation thinning, until it feels like a blade balanced on a breath. The mystery that once seemed like a puzzle to solve, a secret to expose, now pulses with a deeper urgency. Why did this happen? Why were the threads of memory, identity, and loss tangled so deliberately around him? It's no longer about the helicopter, the whispered names, or the vanished secretary. It's about the unbearable loneliness of being seen, and not seen at all. About the way trauma lives in the spaces between words, in the silences that scream, louder than any confession. Cameron's voice cracks as he confesses to himself, to you, to the ghost of his grandfather who never really left, that the greatest fear is not the unknown, but the possibility that everything, even love, could be a lie stitched into his mind to keep him alive or to keep him captive. The choice before him is terrifying. Accept a reality that could break him utterly, or embrace the shadowed lie that shields him from his own deepest pain. It is a moment of total vulnerability, the kind that feels like waking up from a dream you never knew you were trapped inside, a dream stitched together by fear, loss, and the desperate hope that somewhere in this broken story lies a reason to go on. The world tilts. The silence presses close. And then, just as the tension breaks, there is no neat resolution, only the haunting echo of a question that will not die. A truth that whispers through the darkness like a breath on your neck. What if some truths don't want to be found? What if the act of finding them changes you in ways you can never undo? Thank you for watching. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for stories you were never meant to hear. Until next time, remember, some truths don't want to be found.